We're going to kick off with Representative Hager. First, I'm going to just say a few things about what we're actually launching today. NorthCarolinaJobsAgenda.com, or NCJobsAgenda.com, is a one-stop policy shop for moving North Carolina forward through freedom. We're including an activism into one in-depth weekly update now. Instead of all week, now we're providing resources and commentary on developments in taxes and spending, energy policy reform, supply-side health care, and regulation of private sector enterprise and investments. We're reproducing the important things we hear in Raleigh for our people who are demanding from us a weekly, directed, targeted advocacy newsletter so that it's easier to take action on the fast developments. Don't have to tell these folks how fast things happen here in Raleigh. We're providing for our folks something that's going to produce a much more rapid-fire supporter and stakeholder activism for our folks here. We're cultivating a consistent voice for freedom lovers in the General Assembly, and that's why we're out here today. We want to thank our national president, Tim Phillips, for coming out. I want to thank Representative Hager very much and all of you for coming out today. I'm going to turn it over to him in just 1 second. Finally, we're going to look at an in-depth choice that's facing state lawmakers today. They can keep North Carolina moving forward. We can return to some of the irresponsible spending and tax practices that got us here. It's a choice that is raging in the building about 3 blocks that way. We're very excited to have everybody out here today. I'll say a few more words after Representative Hager. I'll turn it over to him, all right? Thank you very much.
Thank you guys for being out here today. You know, it's a great Carolina day, Carolina blue skies, sun shining. It's getting a little humid as normal. Isn't it nice to have the backdrop of the Capitol? I think it's 175 years old today, or this year, excuse me. And the reason I came out here and came early to Raleigh, drove 4 hours to get here, is because I believe in AFP. The reason I believe in AFP is because they believe in getting back to the 4 core functions of government. That is, protect our citizens, number 1. Is to educate our children, number 2. Is to provide an infrastructure and make sure our infrastructure is safe and reliable. And it's to provide a safety net for our citizens. You know, AFP believes, like I do, in getting back to those 4 core essentials and making sure we use the taxpayers' money very efficiently and very effectively to those 4 issues, those 4 core functions of government. I applaud their new rollout of their new agenda. As you know, I had a little bit to do with one of the items that I feel strongly about. I feel strongly about providing infrastructure, again, that provides to build the economy, provides ways for businesses to come here and be competitive. So with that, I'll turn it back over to AFP, but thank you guys for being here. And again, I certainly appreciate AFP being here and really pushing the 4 functions of government. So thank you guys for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Hager. I don't have to tell you guys what a hard-working man that is. We really, really appreciate him driving up early today for this. He's got another long week ahead of him, I'm sure. Probably a happy man that the budget's out of the house. A little bit more about NCJobsAgenda.com. We're providing policy-centered, specific recommendations of action for both platform and content delivery to direct targeted advocacy for our specific agenda priorities. There's 4 of them, and again, it's taxes and spending, private investment and regulations, supply-side health care reform, and energy policy reform, something Representative Hager works so hard on every day. Again, we're very thankful for him coming out. We've got our State Director, Donald Bryson, coming up next. I'll turn it over to him. Thanks a lot for coming out.
I'm short. Don't judge. So thank you all for coming out this morning. America's Prosperity is making what we're describing as a policy shift. We're going to advocate for all the things that we've always advocated for, but we're going to do it with a different messaging point of view. Conservatives, can you hear me now? All right, I'll just stand closer. For a long time, conservatives have long been known as saying no to anything having to do with government. We don't have very many policy alternatives has long been the criticism that we've heard. And this is a way that we want to change this going forward. In large part, the way that conservatives have approached the policy agenda before just by saying no to everything government wanted to do, is why we ended up with the Affordable Care Act. No one was saying that the healthcare system that we had was any good, but there was no conservative free market alternative. And what we're presenting today is the North Carolina Jobs Agenda by Americans for Prosperity, and that these are 4 policy areas that we're going to continue to advocate for in the long term. We will continue to beat this drum because we think that these 4 policy shifts, these 4 policy focuses will create jobs in North Carolina. Before I go into those 4 items in detail, I also want to make the announcement that in an effort to help us continue to push this policy agenda in North Carolina, we currently have 6 field offices open in the state. That's in Charlotte, High Point, Durham, Raleigh, Greenville, and Wilmington. By the end of the year, we'll be opening up 2 additional field offices in Asheville and Fayetteville, and we will continue to beat this drum of the jobs agenda and free market economics in North Carolina. There are 4 different areas in the jobs agenda. We'll always continue to do our legislative agenda, which will have kind of a laundry list of things, but these are the 4 major areas. The first of which is energy policy reform. The state of North Carolina should seek to repeal its renewable portfolio standard. 2 university studies, and in March a report came out from the State Department of Environment and Natural Resources, all of which are critical to the renewable portfolio standard and what it's doing to our state economically. The Diener study in particular said that at higher rate impact levels, the job losses from higher total cost of electricity across the state may exceed the jobs gained through renewables development. We admit that jobs are being created in the renewable industry. The problem is that it's probably costing us more jobs than it's bringing into the state. Furthermore, as we go on, North Carolina remains the only state in the Southeast to have enacted an RPS. As a result of this geographic isolation, long-term energy prices may adversely impact economic growth and challenge recent improvements in employment in North Carolina. That also being from the Diener study. We need to reform how we look at energy in North Carolina. We need to stop subsidizing particular types of energy in the state. This is not an anti-solar or an anti-wind agenda. This is allowing the consumer and the market to determine what is least cost. We need to end all subsidies for any type of energy fuel, whether that's oil, natural gas, wind, solar, or biomass. It all needs to end. We need to let the market figure that out. Otherwise, we're just costing ourselves jobs and making people pay for more expensive energy. The second part will be supply-side healthcare reform. AFP for the long term has been pushing for interstate insurance sales. That's more of a federal push, and we'll continue to push that agenda. We believe that will drive down insurance costs if we can do that and allow more competition within the insurance market. But we also need to reform or repeal the state certificate of need laws. They've been in place for a very, very long time. As far as the 36 states that have certificate of need laws or CON laws, North Carolina has the 4th most stringent in the country. The average of the 36 states that have CON laws, they regulate 14 different services or types of facilities. North Carolina's regulates 25, which is 11 more than the national average, and to be quite frank, is ridiculous. A study from the Mercatus Center at George Mason University came out in February. Their study indicated that because of North Carolina's stringent certificate of need laws, we're probably short about 12,900 hospital beds across the state. We have 49 fewer hospital beds that offer MRI services, and we have 67 fewer hospitals offering CT scans. It requires people with jobs to provide those services, and our own regulations at the state level, at a state that is kind of approaching regulatory capture, is preventing job growth within the state, allowing small businesses, small medical businesses from opening up within the state. We need reform on the healthcare side. Obviously, this would not be an AFP agenda without talking about taxes and spending. The the tax reforms that took place in 2013, we need to continue down that line. That also includes controlling spending. We didn't have a $400 million budget surplus just because we reformed taxes 2 years ago. We also did it because the General Assembly held the line on spending, and they need to continue down that line. That also includes simplifying the tax code and getting rid of special interest carve-outs such as the film industry subsidies or the renewable energy tax credits. or anything like that. Simplifying the tax code needs to be a #1 priority for the General Assembly. This is not, again, this is not anti-renewable industry. This is not anti-film industry. When you have these special tax carve-outs, let me back up. Whether you're on the political left or the political right, everybody agrees that at some level there is a base cost for the core function of government. We can't have the debate for what that base cost is until we can figure out what the proper amount is to tax our citizens. And we can't figure that out until we can simplify the tax code enough and get the special interest carve-outs out of the way. This isn't against any particular industry. This is just trying to make things easier for our state. Since the 2013 tax reforms were enacted as of January 1st of 2014, North Carolina, according to the Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics, has created 123,210 jobs. Our unemployment rate has dropped 1.2% from 6.6 to 5.4%. Everybody wants to compare us to South Carolina, but because of the incentive programs and the special carve-outs that South Carolina has. But over that same time period, South Carolina, as our neighbor to the south, their unemployment rate has increased, and they've only created 56,000 jobs. We need to stop looking at what South Carolina is doing, and we need to be a leader in our own right. And we are with what we did 2 years ago, and we need to stop backtracking on that. And finally, we need to incentivize private investment. We need to get state incentives out of the way, special carve-outs. We need to get things like JDIG out of the way, and we need to allow more things like crowdfunding for small business startups. And we also need to stop over-regulating small businesses. If we can start doing that, we'll start seeing even more job growth. Job growth at the state level is not about lawmakers being able to get out in front of a building and cutting a ribbon and saying, I did that. It's about getting government out of the way and letting small businesses create that, and the lawmakers being able to say, you did that because we got out of your way. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it back over to Joseph. I think we've got a couple more speakers, and then we'll take questions. Thanks.
All right, thank you, boss. Give it up to our main man, Donald Bryson, one more time. Thank you very much. And take this off of here, see if that helps us some. Up next, we're going to have Senator Andrew Brock. I'll remind him, just like us, we got to talk real close into this bad boy right here. Thank you, Donald, for touching on that stuff. He's right. Taxes taken from working people should supply funds for the most important government services to educate our kids, build our roads, protect our communities. These are the most essential services that cannot reasonably be provided by private sector enterprise or individuals. But in the United States today, there are few individual or consumer behaviors remaining not somehow levied by the government. The services they fund are often far beyond what a reasonable taxpayer would consider an essential service. And we have a great North Carolinian here with us today, Senator Brock, to talk more about that. Thank you very much.
All right, I'll try to talk loud enough for you to hear. First, I want to thank, I saw Representative Russell Capps in the audience today. I just thought about when I was a staff member here about 20 years ago, when Representative Capps would talk about some of the new taxes and more services that were not needed will be put upon the people of North Carolina, and how that added more and more burden to North Carolina families, our senior citizens, our small businesses, up and down the line from Murphy to Manteo. And Representative Capps was a great spokesperson, spoke out for these people because they didn't have a lobbyist up here. They didn't have a special interest group. They're good, hard-working, everyday North Carolinians trying to make their way, trying to make something better for their families. Now we look at when the Republicans took over at the 2010 election of what we were facing. A multi-billion-dollar debt. We owe the federal government billions of dollars. We had regulations that were out of control. Businesses were looking to leave. We had companies not looking to move to North Carolina. And listen, we're in the best location in the United States, within 500 miles of 50% of the population. We had location going for us, but we had policies that were not. We implemented tax reform, lower the rates, expand the base. Every economist, or every good economist, should agree with that. We looked at budget control to maintain fiscal discipline when you're looking at putting your budget together. a budget that I would say Dave Ramsey and Clark Howard could be proud of. That's what we should be in North Carolina, to be rather than to seem to make a good budget so that we do take care of our core services and for government to get out of the way. Because one problem we did have, and it was interesting when we went across the state to have our regulation reform meetings, of how many people would come out and say, North Carolina, you have more regulations. And they would change from month to month when you had a particular individual who wanted to interpret what the General Assembly meant. And many times it was much worse. And when I had companies that wanted to move to North Carolina and told me, you have worse regulations than the state of California, that's not what we want. And I said, well, come on now, we can't be as bad as California. He said, I have 2 factories in California. You're worse than California. That's what we were facing here in North Carolina. We just looked at the new budget news of what's coming with our revenue for the state. We see that jobs are coming to North Carolina. We're creating jobs, creating revenue. Why do we change that course? We don't need to change the course of maintaining fiscal discipline. We remain steadfast in our budget control and make sure we pay for the service and cut out the special interest on these budgets. This is what we need in North Carolina. This is why we need to continue this path and not vary from the path. Because we have seen the fruits from our labor. We have seen what has come from the vine when we took care of the garden, when we pruned and fertilized and made it well. And any good gardener or farmer should know, you don't leave the fields to grow over with weeds. And when you have more and more special interests, more and more taxes start coming into place, it chokes out the good plants, it chokes out the good jobs, and it hurts families across North Carolina. And one thing that we are putting North Carolina, not just to change it here, but let North Carolina be an example for other states across the nation. And let us be an example to Washington, D.C., because they need to get their act in gear too. So as soon as we keep pushing these reforms, pushing these budget cuts, making sure that the money gets back into the pockets of our working families, our senior citizens, North Carolina will be the greatest place to live, because it's a great place to live right now, but when we put everything together, every other state will want to be like North Carolina. Thank you, and God bless each and every one of you.
Thank you very much, Senator. Just want to remind everybody and all our activists who are coming to lunch with us to come to our table over here, RSVP, to get a ticket for lunch down here at the Big Easy. Up next, going to introduce someone very special to our organization. He leads America's most powerful grassroots advocacy operation. We're in 36 states and a national headquarters. I'm new at AFP, but since listening to Tim, I took some notes about what he's taught me at our staff retreats and at our gatherings in Washington, D.C. He taught me that lower taxes and a limited government were the American idea. That's what launched the industrial age. That's what grew the world's GDP to where it is today, and that's what created the kind of prosperity that lets us come out here today in the beautiful society that you see. It did not exist before people threw off the chains of an overbearing government. Why would we spend more on a hapless, enormous bureaucratic system that's prioritizing the well-connected interests over the many? We're tired of a cliff-hanging Congress, junk ratings on municipal debt, bulging state budgets on non-recurring funds, one-off increases, revenue transfers, general fund withdrawals, emergency fund cleanings, higher fees, and an increasingly unresponsive and unaccountable system. That's what I've taken from Tim. I'm really excited that he's here today. Everybody, please welcome our National President, Tim Phillips.
Well, good morning, fellow freedom fighters. Good morning. Glad you're here. I tell you, for late May, I'm a Carolina boy. I'm a South Carolina boy, so I'm on the wrong side of the line. I know Donald. He tells me that often. But we've actually got nice, mild weather for this time of year, so it's great to be here with you all. Americans for Prosperity, we launched over a decade ago. And North Carolina was one of the 2 original state chapters. And when you think about the commitment we have long-term to North Carolina, we've had full-time staff on the ground, North Carolina folks, literally since March of 2004. That's the commitment level. And when Donald talks about moving from 6 regional offices to 8 regional field offices, we're going to continue growing. Because I'll tell you something, the days of the big government side, having all of the troops and having all the push at the state capitol and in Washington, D.C., Frankly, they're over. They're over, folks. We're building and we're growing for the long term here in North Carolina, and we're going to continue doing that. And to Donald's point, and by the way, Donald, thank you for the work you're doing as state director here in North Carolina. Very much so. Appreciate it. When you think about what our movement stands for, I do think Donald is right. Too often, we simply say no. And there are times when saying no is important, right? When someone wants to raise taxes on folks, that's the time to say no. Or, like the budget that the House put forward that spends too much money, that's a time to say no. But we also want to make sure we're putting forward a long-term positive agenda. And that's what this effort is, the jobs agenda. We want to make sure that every state, every American has a shot at the dream of living a prosperous life, and that's what our agenda is about. It's making sure that every American from every walk of life can actually go out and live a prosperous life, and we know that prosperity only comes when you actually have economic freedom and individual liberty. And so that's what we're fighting for at Americans for Prosperity. And when I think about the slow economic growth across the country of the last 6 years, it's partly a result of not having enough freedom, not having enough ability of folks to go out and create and grow and live their lives without government regulation and taxation, frankly hurting them more than it's helping them. And that's why when Donald mentions 123,000 jobs being created in North Carolina, I believe it is since the beginning of 2014, that makes you one of the national leaders in North Carolina. You see, when you lower tax rates and when you give more regulatory freedom to hardworking folks, they go out and they create. And that's what's happening here in North Carolina. So I congratulate you on what you're doing. I know that there's a lot that lies ahead, and I can tell you at Americans for Prosperity, we're committed to working with you for the long term. Gone are the days when we, frankly, only show up during one key issue battle or in one key year. We want to be here year in and year out fighting for economic freedom and prosperity for every American, and that's exactly what we're going to do. And I'm proud to stand with you. I can't believe that over 10 years ago when we launched this organization, when I look at today where we are, full-time staff in 35 states, and an ability to actually move an agenda that helps every American go out and live a prosperous life, that's something we're proud of, and it's something we're committed to doing for the long term. So we're standing with you. Thanks for what you're doing. By the way, I know a lot of you drove in from good distances today, right? Thank you for doing that. Thank you for getting up this morning, taking time off from jobs and away from family to come here and be with us. And I know also across the staff or across this crowd are some of our field directors and folks working out at the grassroots here in North Carolina. I want to thank you for what you're doing as well. It's hard work, right? Freedom is hard work. It's going out and knocking on doors and making phone calls and asking folks to stand up and in the legislature and do the right thing. But thank you for being a part of it. And I'll tell you, it's making a difference. I think about where we were as a movement a few years ago and our ability now to actually impact legislation and actually make sure that our voices are heard. It's a quantum leap forward from where we were. So thank you all, and I look forward to the next few months and weeks here in North Carolina. Thank you.
All right, we're going to let these guys take questions from you. The really exciting part here. I just want to remind everybody, if you don't remember our tax day poll, April 1st through 4th, we asked people in North Carolina a lot of questions. One of them was, do you think less taxes and less government are better for the economy, or do you think more taxes and more government are better for the economy? That's a pretty simple question. 83% of North Carolinians responded. This is a sample with plus or minus 3 margin of error. So maybe only 80, 78, 75% meant that they think lower taxes and less government are better for the economy. I encourage you to look back at that tax day poll as you look on our platforms online today to see what we're launching. With that, I'll open up to questions from you guys. Thanks a lot for coming out again.
Questions?
Gary.
About the House budget last week.
Sure.
If things don't improve and you don't like your organization
doesn't like the final budget. I know it's a lot of what ifs here, but what is your group willing to do in the next election cycle to go and compete against, or criticize those types of legislators?
No, that's a great question, Gary. You have to think about Americans for Prosperity as something different than an election organization. A lot of groups that look like Americans for Prosperity and maybe even feel a little bit like Americans for Prosperity use things that happen in the legislative session to build up for an election cycle. We use the interest in policy and election cycles to build up for our legislative fights. And so the things, last year when we were holding Kay Hagan accountable about her votes on the Affordable Care Act, it was really holding her accountable about her votes on the Affordable Care Act. And we're willing to do the same thing with lawmakers who want to overspend the people's, taxpayers' money. Whether they're Republican or Democrat, that's just what we'll do. We're all about voter education efforts, and it's something we look forward to doing.
You have to make sure you have, I don't have the right IRS language. You have an action group that can target specific legislators. Is that right?
Well, we talk about legislators specifically about the policy issues. Now, that's our 501c4 distinction, and we do that, and with that distinction, we can also ask people to ask the legislators to vote yes or no on certain bills, and so that's how we get involved with the legislature. But specifically on issue education, yeah. Chris.
First of all, Tim, thanks for coming down today.
It's good to be back.
It's good to have you. My question is, it seems inevitable that the Trans-Pacific Partnership is going to become the rule. What impact do you think that might have on the economy?
Yeah.
I hear a lot of contradictory things. So.
Yeah, I know at Americans for Prosperity we support free trade. We think it's important to have the ability to go out and trade goods across the world. The biggest focal point for us, though, at the federal level really has been the Export-Import Bank. You've probably seen that battle going on now for, golly, about a year now. And we want to make sure that the Export-Import Bank is not reauthorized. It's a bank, and many of you know this, but the Export-Import Bank basically backs risky foreign loans for American corporations in a way that puts taxpayers on the hook for those loans. And we don't think that it helps our economy. In fact, it's more about cronyism. And so we are focusing, our primary focus on the federal side is the Export-Import Bank, making sure that we don't reauthorize it because it's billions of taxpayer dollars that are on the hook for risky loans in places like Venezuela, Russia, Saudi Arabia, places like that. And one other thing about the Export-Import Bank, there's enormous corruption. That often happens with cronyism in government. And we've seen now members of the Export-Import Bank being investigated for, frankly, corruption at the Export-Import Bank. So that's really been our focal point this whole year.
Questions? Mark? Because I represent the folks back home too. People choose to support or not Americans for Prosperity. We're a true free market organization that if people don't care to read what we put out, if they don't care to donate to our cause, then we don't exist. As Tim said, we're one of the 2 charter chapters with Americans for Prosperity. Right now we keep in contact with 202,000 people around the state. I think that's pretty hefty, and what we do is we bring grassroots pressure to the General Assembly. And when you bring grassroots pressure to the General Assembly, that's bringing their constituents to them to talk to them. We don't hold anybody at gunpoint. We don't twist their arm around and say, you need to go tell your legislator to do this. They hear our message, they agree with it because they just happen to agree with it, and we provide a lot of education resources as well, and then they tell their legislator what they think. Hopefully, what happens is that lawmakers vote on what they're hearing from their constituents, and we try to help in that process. an advocacy organization that seeks to empower citizens in the legislative process, and I think we're pretty good at it. Yeah, and then Patrick, yes. I'm really trying to understand your question. What do you, break it down into a sentence. What are we going to do to educate people in general? Oh, okay. Easy enough. Oh, specifically on the issue of education. Oh, okay. Well, education reform, specifically school choice, has been something that's been near and dear to AFP's heart for a really long time. I came from the school choice world before I was with Americans for Prosperity, and that's one of our issue advocacy efforts. It's not in the jobs agenda, but I think it's very closely related, and that's something that pretty yearly, and it's pretty regularly. We have a lot of educational events. We do town hall meetings around the state. We do some roundtable meetings with activists and things like that at the grassroots level to educate people about what we think should go forward with education in North Carolina. But it's just another project in the hopper. Another issue, just like tax reform and energy reform and healthcare reform, education reform is also very important. We're going to treat it like that because it's also part of the economic future of the state. Patrick?
You said we've heard many times that we think this budget, the House budget, spends too much money.
Sure.
Some of the biggest line item increases are teacher raises, other state employee raises. We know you don't like the incentives parts of it.
Right.
But where do you think should be cut? Should they not give teachers bigger raises? Should they not give state employees raises? Should they not increase textbook funding? What should be cut?
Oh, wow. So you're just going to give me the big red pen? That's nice.
Or should it be elsewhere?
No, I think there's plenty of pork in this budget, Alex. I don't think anybody in this area right here is going to argue with you that state employees and teachers, I can't talk any louder, that state employees or teachers are not a core function of state government. Nobody's going to say that. But I think that there is still plenty of pork in this bill. I don't know why this is a small part of the bill, but there are other examples like this in there. Why is there $200,000 going to build a baseball stadium in Cleveland County? Why is that part of state money? I don't understand. Why are we giving tens of millions of dollars in tax handouts to the solar energy industry? I think the state should create an environment where we have a reliable and affordable electrical grid so that we can rebuild our manufacturing sector and have jobs that way, but it is not the state's function to build a solar farm. So we can have, I'll be happy to have a longer conversation about that, but I think there's plenty of pork that can be cut out of this budget. Just for the record, AFP's bright line on good spending, bad spending is going to be what would be the taxpayer Bill of Rights limits on spending increases, which for this budget would be 2.7%. The governor's proposed budget was 2.3%. The House's budget was 6.3%, which is astronomical and ridiculous. Sure. Do I see the green? I don't actually know what's going to happen with the green energy tax credits going forward. We were promised 2 years ago by this General Assembly and the governor when they signed House Bill 998 that these tax credits would go away, and then now they're back in the House budget, and I don't know what the Senate's going to do with it. I think it's them going back on their word. I've been accused, and AFP has been accused of being anti-solar and anti-renewable. I don't think that's the case at all. I think that if that's the line of thinking you want to take, then this budget is anti-furniture industry and anti-Christmas tree farm, because they don't get incentives in that bill either. And I'm sure that those industries would love to have them. What's happened is there are at least 19 lobbyists that I've counted for the solar energy industry down at the General Assembly. And when you have a lot of lobbyists down there, you tend to get your way and you tend to get handouts out of the state budget. When was the last time you saw a lobbyist from the furniture industry down there? Any of you reporters? been a really long time, I'm guessing that. They also didn't get handouts in the budget either. Same thing with the sweet potato industry, or the Christmas farm industry, or the apple industry, or any number of agriculture industries. You know, we've got an industry that's coming in and been really heavy-handed in politics, and they've got a lot of lobbyists, and they're getting special handouts. And I think it's a problem for our tax code, and according to the Diener study, they're probably costing us more jobs than they're bringing in. We'll take one or two more. Anybody else? Lynn, nothing?
I'll get you later.
All right. All right. One last one. We think the certificate of need laws in North Carolina need to be, if not repealed altogether, drastically reformed. As of right now, I'm in favor of repealing them altogether. They're, you know, regulating 25 different facilities or services is ridiculous, even compared to the national average. And so anything that heads down that line is very positive. Just on a final note, today, the launch of the jobs agenda was not about throwing grenades. We're not trying to throw anybody under the bus. The jobs agenda is a way for us to connect better with our activists, but also be far, far more transparent with the media and legislators about what our agenda is. There are no surprises here. This is the drum that we're going to beat for a really long time. What we want to find is a place and a common ground that we can come together with lawmakers and talk about this and create a dialogue to go down so that we can push this agenda and create jobs for North Carolina. I firmly believe that the brightest days for North Carolina are still ahead of us, and this is the path that we think we should take. Thank you all for coming out today.